Hi, in this video, we're going to study about shares and share capital. Before we discuss share capital in detail, let's look at a very simple everyday example so that you can understand the concept very easily. So let's imagine that it's Valentine's Day and you need money to buy a gift for your boyfriend or girlfriend. However, you are broke and you have no money at all. So let's say you need about $100, and now my question to you is, think about it and tell me, do you think it's going to be relatively easier to borrow $10 each from 10 different people, or is it going to be easier to borrow $100 directly from just one person? Okay, so I'm going to presume that you have thought about it, and now if you have given it some thought, you would realize that option A, that is borrowing $10 each from 10 different people, is obviously going to be much easier than just asking for directly $100 from one person. And trust me, if you got a grasp of what I just explained, then the remaining video is going to be very simple for you to understand. First, let me just define share capital for you. So, share capital is simply the capital that is collected by a company for its business purposes. And just remember that both public as well as private companies can issue shares. However, just remember that a public company can issue a larger amount of shares than a private company can. However, this is something that we're going to look into later on. Now, before we move on, I'd like to make a very basic preliminary point, which is that this is a very basic introductory video about share capital. So there are chances that if you are from a commerce background, then you would probably definitely know what share capital is all about. However, this video is primarily intended for those of us who come from either sciences or engineering or humanities or arts background, and they have no prior knowledge. So this is the kind of introductory video that is going to help you gain that foundational knowledge. Okay, so now let me give you another example. Imagine that you want to start a company, and let's say that you need about 1 lakh rupees to start that company. However, the first option that you think of is that you can just borrow that money from your friends or relatives, and you realize soon that that is not something that is possible. The next possible idea that occurs to you is that perhaps you could go to a bank and ask for a loan, and right now we're talking about a relatively small amount, that is 1 lakh. So it might be easier for you to acquire that loan from a bank. However, in normal circumstances, to start a company you need much more money, and that amount is not usually possible to get from a bank. Even if you do get it from a bank, always remember that banks, when they provide loans, those are usually never interest free, and you would always have to pay interest on those loans later on, which means that you would have to give a greater amount than what you originally borrowed, and the amount that you return is not going to be the same as the one that you borrowed. Now, as weird as this may sound, let me tell you what actually happens when a person wants to start a company. What happens is that that person is going to obtain that amount, the amount needed to start the company, from random people, and those random people are going to be ordinary random people from the public like you and me. And like I said, as weird as this may sound, but this is what happens. If you think about what exactly shares and share capital are, it's basically, strangers giving money to other strangers. And wait, so you must be wondering, am I trying to say that it's going to be easier to gain money from random strangers who don't even know me and who don't really obviously are going to have any background knowledge about me? Is it going to be easier to gain money from the general public instead of, let's say, friends or family or relatives? And because these are the people who are more likely to believe in the chances that of your company being successful. So yes, this is basically what I'm telling you, that it's relatively much easier to raise funding, to raise money, to start a company, or to expand your company if that is the case. And eventually, once you study corporate law or company law, whichever it is that you're studying, because both of these are significantly overlapping subjects, so whichever subject it is that you're studying, and by the way, corporate law is wider than just company law. So anyways, coming back to the point, the conclusion is that yes, it's definitely going to be much easier to get money from the public, especially in the public limited company, in order to start your company. Okay, so what we're going to study next is have a very brief look at the process of issuing shares. That is, how exactly does a company go about issuing shares, and basically this is precisely what we're talking about, that is getting money from the public by giving them shares. Now, before we look into the process of issuance of shares and what share certificates look like and so on and so forth, we need to get a good grasp on some of the important terms related to share capital. So we're going to look at, first of all, the difference between authorized share capital and paid up share capital. Just in case you don't know, you can watch my other video where I talk about this in detail. But for now, I'm just going to mention very briefly that when a company is formed, there are two essential documents that you have to draft. The first is the MOA, that is the Memorandum of Association, and the other one is Articles of Association. So these are two documents that a company has to draft before it can even get registered. So moving on, just remember for now that the relevant terms that we're going to study, authorized and paid up share capital, these are things that you have to include in these preliminary documents. So that is why I mentioned these at the outset. However, coming to the topic for today, that is what exactly is authorized and paid up share capital. First of all, let's just think of a very basic situation. Let's say that you want to start a company and you know that in the future the maximum amount of money that you're going to need to operate that company is, for example, let's say 1 crore, and that particular amount that you have thought of is the maximum amount that you think that you will possibly need. By the way, let me just tell you very quickly that these are things that can be edited and revised later on. For now, just remember that when starting out with a company, you will have to think of that maximum amount, and that maximum amount is what is basically called authorized share capital. Why? Because you are getting the authority from the relevant registration authority, that is the SECP in Pakistan, and that authority basically gives you the right to issue further share capital in the future as and when the need arises. So in short, authorized share capital is simply the amount of capital that you envisage that is the maximum amount of shares that your company is going to be issuing. And just remember that once you set that maximum, in order to change that maximum, you will have to follow certain steps and requirements. So it's a good idea at the outset to decide a very viable amount so that you don't have to change it in the very near future after starting your company. So in short, to repeat, authorized share capital is simply the maximum amount of shares that you believe your company is going to be needing to issue. And like I said, shares is simply giving out share certificates to the public so that you can get money in return. On the other hand, paid up share capital talks about the kind of capital that you have actually issued. So for instance, when starting out, you realize that at the very beginning you just need about, let's say, 10 lakh rupees from that 1 crore amount that you think that you will eventually be needing in the near future or maybe in the longer term. However, at the moment when you're just starting out, you think that you're going to need just 10 lakh. So what you're going to do is you are going to issue shares for up to the amount of 10 lakh rupees only. So now I think the difference should be very clear to you that authorized share capital is, on the one hand, the maximum amount of shares that your company can issue, and you have to state that in the Memorandum of Association when you get your company registered. And on the other hand, paid up share capital is the amount of shares that you're going to be issuing at the very beginning So what happens is that, like I said, for example, you issue shares for up to the amount of 10 lakh rupees, and those shares are going to be called your paid up share capital. The amount, again I repeat, the issued shares are basically the paid up share capital. Okay, so that was just a very brief introduction. In another video, I'm going to give you a very specific example so that it's clearer to you.